All right, let's be real. If you're a content creator, blogger, or an entrepreneur just getting started, the last thing you want to do is spend hours building a website. That's where Bluehost comes in. Their AI tools make custom WordPress sites in minutes. No coding, no stressing. You also get built-in marketing and e-commerce tools to grow your business. And with faster loading, you can secure the bag without the lag. It's never been easier to launch your website. Go to Bluehost.com now to get started.
From the Boston Globe, this is Rhode Island Report. I'm Ed Fitzpatrick. Welcome back to the podcast where we bring you big conversations from our very small state. There's a leadership battle brewing at the State House. Last week, Senate President Dominick Ruggerio issued a statement endorsing Democratic Majority Whip Valerie Lawson to replace the current Majority Leader, Ryan Pearson. How did this rift begin? And what will happen next? Senator Ryan Pearson is here to tell us his side of the story. Senator Pearson, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So last week, the Senate President Dominick Ruggerio announced that he's backing Senator Val Lawson as she seeks to replace you as the Senate's Democratic Majority Leader. Did that come as a surprise to you, and what's your response?
Yeah, it certainly did. I was very disappointed that Senators Lawson and Ruggerio did not reach out to me before that, and also did not reach out to senators before that went out to the press.
So it seems clear that a rift with Ruggerio developed after you visited his home in North Providence in March. He'd been battling cancer and shingles, and he seems to have taken offense at whatever you said. So tell us exactly how that conversation went.
Yeah. I want to be very clear. I have tremendous respect for President Ruggerio. I've known and worked with him for 12 to 14 years. He's been someone that, I've learned a lot from. I've learned the inner workings of that building with. And obviously, I've worked very closely with him, one as a rank and file member, but then as finance chairman, now as majority leader. And so we've built a relationship, one that's become both professional and personal over the years. And, I think the context of the timing is important in that when I had gone to see the president, this was after he returned from the first extended absence of the session this year. And I felt, honestly, he was pushing himself a little too hard. And I just wanted him to know that myself and the other members of the Senate had his back, that we would get the job done, and we would be able to cover him on anything that he needed to and not to push himself more than his health would allow. We had a very open conversation about that. He shared with me more about his health than he ever had shared with me. And my goal for him was, if there's something that's important to you, if there are things that are important to you, tell me what they are. We'll make sure they get done. He said, well, Ryan, I want you to know something. I am thinking that in June, if my health isn't better, I'm thinking about not running again. That was the first time he had kind of put a time and a deadline to that kind of a conversation. And I said, okay, well, Mr. President, that's your decision to make.
And you hadn't heard that before, right?
He had indicated, he indicated just a few days before that on Newsmakers on public TV that he might not run again for Senate President, but he had never put a date to it. He never put some certainty to it. So that was the first time he kind of put an internal clock or a deadline and tied it to his health. And I just said to him, I said, Mr. President, I want you to know, if you are weighing, your health versus these obligations, again, just let me know what's important to you. I want you to make the best decision for your health. He asked me a series of questions around, okay, if I were to, I were not to run again, what would you do about this? What would you do about that? We went back and forth, had those conversations. I left that conversation with him, him saying, I'm glad we have a plan. I'm glad we talked about it, but I don't think we need a plan right now. I said, Mr. President, I totally agree with you. It's totally your decision. You let me know what you want to do, but we're here for you.
And before that day, had you talked with him about you running for Senate President and succeeding him at some point?
That's always was the conversation from when he asked me to stay in the Senate and not run for general treasurer. That was part of the conversation.
Tell me a bit about that, because you did consider running for the treasurer's position when it opened up. What did he say to you?
Yeah, I did. He really convinced me that it was important that I stay in the Senate, that there was a lot of change and turnover in the Senate to continue to come, that we needed people in the Senate who had the experience, who had been around, had learned the issues, had been chairs, had done the work. And so he asked me to stay then. He also asked me to stay he called me when the congressional seat opened up and make sure I wasn't running. And I informed him that I was not considering running for that either. So, it's been an ongoing conversation that we've had, which is, I think, no surprise. Kind of every president and leader and every speaker and leader kind of have that relationship that the incumbent president or speaker helps their leader to take on to the next position.
So address the suspicion that seemed to have developed among some that you went to his home to make the case for him leaving the Senate presidency because of his health sooner and letting you take over, or that it was even an attempted coup.
Yeah. I would say this. If that was the case, I would have had to talk to at least one other senator about some coup. What you will find, as any member of the press would, and I know the president has been asked, you will not find one senator that did that. And so I think it was a very unfortunate rumor that took advantage of a situation that I had not spoken out before about. And the reason I haven't spoken out before is because I respected the privacy of that conversation. I respected the privacy of the Senate president's health. And I never spoke of that conversation to anyone, not my own chief of staff, not the president's chief of staff. And I did that because I was concerned about exactly a rumor like that developing, because the entire chamber before that point was already concerned about the Senate's ability to get things done. I had senators coming to me saying, if the president's out again, are we going to be able to get our stuff through the House? Those were the kinds of conversations that were already there, and I didn't want to add any flame to that. And so obviously kept it very, very private and haven't really spoken out about really what was going on and kind of let some of the press narrative take its own hold.
Yeah, I do want to talk about the getting legislation through, but first, just tell me how that conversation with Ruggerio ended.
He said, I'm glad we have a plan. I don't think we need one right now. He gave me a hug on the way out. Thank you, Mr. Leader. And we agreed we'd talk in a couple more days about a few other things we had been talking about that day.
Well, when did you first know he was upset with you?
It's about probably 2 to 3 weeks later that I learned that he was upset with me. Not from him. A senator called me and said, hey, I heard that the president's upset with you. And I said, and I dismissed it, honestly. I'd never thought anything of it. And I said, no, that's not true. And then a second senator called with the same story. And I said, okay, well, this is odd. And so that's when I reached out to the president myself. And I said, I heard you upset. And he said, yes, I am. And I said, all right, well, what's going on? I don't want to talk about it right now. Huh. And that conversation, it was a consistent, I don't want to talk about it right now. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Let's talk about it next week. That continued for a few weeks there. And then he was out again for the remainder of the session. And so we weren't really able to ever really have that conversation. It's been by no shortage of my part in trying to reach out, whether it be text, phone call, in person, to try to continue to have that conversation.
But you eventually were able to talk to him about it, right?
We did talk before he went out the second time.
And what did he say?
I had asked him, hey, had you found anything yet to be upset about? And, he said to me that he had not yet found anything. And I said, okay, well, how much longer are we going to look? We have work to do. We got to get to the end of the session. And the answer I got was, Ryan, you'll be the first person to know if I don't find anything, and I will apologize, or something along those lines that he offered to do. So
and I take it he didn't end up apologizing.
He didn't, and we never had a substantive conversation about that issue again. And I was kind of led to believe that he had blown over and just wanted it to go away. And I said, okay, fine.
And then he announced his
and then this comes out
Lawson.
now. Yeah.
All right.
So,
do you regret anything you said during that conversation or going to his house?
I guess I don't regret anything in particular that was said, because I don't think any of it was anything but a friend and a colleague going to say hi and make sure you're doing okay and make sure we can keep the chamber running and balance the obligations of we still have an institution to run and the chamber to run. Maybe could I have been more cautious or understanding perhaps what was going through his mind at the time? Obviously, battling a health condition like that obviously can mess with people's way of thinking. And perhaps that's something I didn't fully appreciate at the time. But on the same token, the conversation itself was never anything more than a friend and a colleague coming to talk, and was never adversarial in any way. So I just think perhaps, in hindsight, it was allowed to metastasize into something that it really shouldn't have been.
Yeah. Do you have any theory as to why he reacted the way he did?
The only thing I would say is obviously the president, has been in the Senate for probably over 40 years, I think, at this point. Even the mere nature of thinking about maybe doing something different can be concerning to somebody if that's been such a piece of your life. And perhaps it's just uncomfortable with the conversation in general versus anything that we maybe have talked about.
And have you spoken to him since he announced he's backing Lawson?
No.
What's your relationship like with Senator Lawson?
We've had a good working relationship for a long period of time. As finance chairman, I work really closely with her on an initiative to ensure that we were able to give more funding for SNAP recipients if they bought fruits and vegetables. That was something we worked very closely on. I've worked very closely on issues of education, on ensuring that we are honest about charter schools and the destabilizing effect they have on districts. So we've had a lot of good conversations and a lot of shared values and vision for that. And so we've had a good working relationship for many years.
So why do you think she's trying to replace you?
I think she was asked to by the Senate president, and I think, that's a tough thing sometimes to say no to.
And have you talked to her before or after the announcement?
in social settings and in a couple text messages here and there, but nothing that's substantive.
So you're expected to win re-election on November 5th. You're running against an independent candidate. So if you win, will you seek to remain as Senate Majority Leader?
Yes, I'm absolutely intending to remain a member of the Senate leadership. I think our colleagues are looking for how are we going to get things done. I think I bring an experience with me of, not only 12 years in the chamber, but having served as finance chairman, having served as majority leader. There's 3 people in the Senate that negotiate with the House. It's the Senate President, the leader, and the finance chair. I've had 2 of those jobs. I believe I will be incredibly effective to continue to advocate for senators and for their issues and make sure that the Senate is able to achieve its outcomes that it's looking for. And I think that the Senate does need somebody in the room that can be negotiating on their behalf and be effective at doing so. And I believe I have a track record that demonstrates my ability to do so.
But aside from your qualifications, is it going to be hard to hold on to that seat without the Senate President's support?
There's a lot of conversations happening with senators about how do we put the entire Senate in a place where it is effective. And for every position, from the top down through the chairs, that's going to be a conversation that senators continue to have. We've got some time. It's a conversation that isn't always meant for the public. It's an internal caucus deliberation. But I'm confident that at the end of the day, the senators are going to come to a decision that is beneficial for the institution and being able to get things done.
Well, let me ask you, if the vote took place today, how many votes would you get out of the 31 Democrats now in the Senate?
More than a majority.
And you're competing against the whip who counts votes. Are you saying you're counting the votes and they're in your favor?
I can count too.
So in your statement last week, you said it's been no secret that the Senate has suffered through a period of change and loss. This has led to a weakened institution that could do better in meeting its obligations to the people of Rhode Island. Tell us more about what you're talking about there.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned the turnover and some of the loss. And so I think the Senate has lost some of its traditions and some of its collegiality, some of its operating routines that have allowed us to be an effective chamber in the past. I've worked with 3 governors, 3 speakers, and 2 Senate presidents. I've seen a lot of different leadership styles. One of the things that I think that the Senate has benefited from in the past is being really clear-eyed about what our priorities are as we start the session and how do we make sure that we marshal the resources of the chamber and of the institution to do that. And so that is the type of leadership I think we need to continue to have in the Senate, and we need to make sure we can bring back. I think we've lost our way a little bit, and it's understandable given, again, that change and that loss that's gone through. But if you think about, this year as we worked to put together a healthcare package, that was something that several senators had begun working on and brought it to the president and myself. We were able to work with those senators and then bring in other senators from the health committee and ended up putting together a collective package. And that package was not a silver bullet that would solve all of our healthcare problems, but we do believe it was a meaningful step forward in being able to do that.
That was a big priority. I remember being there at the press conference. 25 healthcare bills had to do with the rising cost, the low reimbursement rates, the proposed sale of 2 community hospitals. How did that package fare?
We were able to achieve some of the objectives. I don't think we were able to achieve enough.
Well, one frustration I noticed in the Senate was that the session began with a push to double the amount of paid family leave in Rhode Island to 12 weeks, and that bill was championed by Senator Lawson. But it ended up with legislation that increased the maximum temporary caregiver benefit from just 6 to 8 weeks over 2 years. Why was it watered down so much?
Yeah, I can't speak to it as I was not directly involved in that negotiation, but I can say that that is probably another, likely symptom of, needing to be a bit stronger in the room and negotiate for that bill in full. The ADU legislation that was the Speaker's top priority was brought through the Senate basically almost in original form, and it did not include key items that I know senators had wanted. I know a lot of senators had wanted to make sure that the main house of an ADU was owner-occupied. I know that a lot of senators wanted to make sure there were size limitations on those ADUs. None of those changes were incorporated, but on the same token, a TCI bill came in that was dramatically reduced.
And do you think that is a result, in part at least, of Senator Ruggerio's absences?
I absolutely believe that you need somebody strong in the room negotiating. That is for sure. No member of our staff is going to be able to, negotiate toe-to-toe with the Speaker of the House. It's not a system that's set up for success for the institution. And that is a bit what I mean by the institution can be stronger. And the institution needs a leadership team that's able to be fully present and able to be there and get the job done. And so we've got to put our colleagues in a position where they can be successful.
Ruggerio emphasized over and over again when he was absent that he's staying in touch with the staff and in contact with other senators. But do you think it wasn't as effective as he wanted it to be?
I think if it was short term, I think it could have been just fine. I think we have to be honest, though, that when you have these long period stretches, that it does have an impact. And certainly, if you were to ask some of the colleagues in the House, even I think they were even in a position where they felt that the House was really being able to be more dominant in the last session. And
the Speaker had too much control. Was that the impression some had?
I think that there's an impression that's out there on that, but I think that it was about the Senate was a bit disorganized.
So if you could speak with Senate President Ruggerio right now, what would you tell him?
I think I would say, Mr. President, there's a lot of work that we have left to get done, and we've worked together for, well over a decade. I'm confident we can get the job done. Let's make sure we can do that. It's not like the Senate President and I haven't had an argument before. It's not like the Senate President never argued with, former Leader McCaffrey or former Whip Goodwin. Those things always happened, but there's nothing that ever couldn't have been talked out and wasn't talked out, and that's really what I think would need to go forward.
All right. Senator Pearson, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Rhode Island Report is a production of the Boston Globe in collaboration with Rhode Island PBS. Today's episode was produced by Megan Hall. Audio mixing and mastering by Marissa Ewing of Hemlock Creek Productions. Our music is from APM. Be sure to follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. I'm Ed Fitzpatrick. See you next week.